Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Our first story is titled, "My Brother Tried to Blame Me for His Failed Business." I'm Missy, 32 years old, and until recently I thought I had a pretty good relationship with my older brother Dennis. He's 35 and has always been the entrepreneur of the family. You know the type, always coming up with new business ideas, convinced that the next one will be his big break. Meanwhile, I've always been more of the steady, play it safe type. I got my degree in accounting, landed a stable job at a good firm, and have been slowly but surely building my career. For years, Dennis's ventures were harmless enough. He'd start something new, get really excited about it for a few months, and then it would fizzle out when he realized it wasn't the get-rich-quick scheme he'd hoped for. Our parents would shake their heads and mutter about how he just needed to settle down and get a real job. But they never pushed too far. I think they always hoped one of his ideas would eventually pan out. About 2 years ago, Dennis came to me with what he called his best idea yet. He wanted to start a high-end meal prep service, focusing on organic, locally sourced ingredients. "It's perfect, Missy," he told me, his eyes shining with that familiar excitement. "People are so health conscious these days, and everyone's too busy to cook. We'll be solving two problems at once." I had to admit it did sound like a terrible idea. Dennis had always been a good cook, and he'd done his research on the market. He'd even found a commercial kitchen space he could rent. The only problem, he needed startup capital. "I've got about half of what I need saved up," he explained, "but I'm a little short. I was hoping maybe you can lend me the rest. Just until the business gets off the ground, of course. I'll pay you back with interest." I hesitated. I always been careful with my money, and the amount Dennis was asking for wasn't small, but he was my brother and he seemed so sure this time. Plus, I had to admit the idea of being part of a successful family business was appealing. "Okay," I said finally, "but we need to do this properly. We'll draw up a contract, set terms for repayment, the whole 9 yards. Dennis agreed enthusiastically, and we spent the next week working out the details. I even helped him refine his business plan using some of the skills I've learned in my accounting work. By the time we were done, I felt pretty good about the whole thing. Sure, there were risks involved, but that's true of any new business, right? For the first few months, things seemed to be going well. Dennis was working long hours, but he was passionate about what he was doing. He'd send me updates about new clients he'd landed, rave reviews he'd received. I started to think that maybe this really was the big break he'd been waiting for. But then slowly things started to change. The updates became less frequent, and when I did hear from Dennis, he seemed stressed and defensive. When I gently asked how the financials were looking, he'd brush me off with vague assurances that everything was fine. He just needed more time to get things really rolling. I tried to give him space, remembering how I'd felt when I was first starting out in my career, and everything seemed overwhelming. But as the months went by and the date of his first repayment came and went with no word from Dennis, I started to worry. Finally, after weeks of unanswered calls and texts, I decided to drop by the kitchen space he was renting. What I found shocked me. That place was a mess. Dirty dishes piled everywhere, rotting produce in the corners. And Dennis, he was sitting in the middle of it all, head in his hands. "Dennis," I said softly, picking my way through the chaos, "what's going on?" He looked up at me, and I was startled by how haggard he looked. "It's over, Missy," he said, his voice hollow. "I have lost everything." Over the next hour, the whole story came tumbling out. Despite the initial positive response, Dennis had struggled to retain customers. He'd started cutting corners, using cheaper ingredients to try to increase his profit margins, but that only led to complaints about quality, which drove even more customers away. He tried to expand too quickly, hiring staff he couldn't afford in the hopes of increasing output, but without the customer base to support it, he just ended up deeper in debt. "I'm so sorry, Missy," he said, looking utterly defeated. "I know I owe you money, but I don't have it. I don't have anything." My heart broke for him. Yes, I was upset about the money, but seeing my usually confident, enthusiastic brother so broken was even worse. It's okay, I said, putting a hand on his shoulder. We'll figure something out. Maybe we can look at your books, see if there's any way to salvage things. Dennis nodded glumly, and we spent the next few days going over every aspect of the business. It quickly became clear that there was no saving it. The debts were too high, the reputation too damaged. The kindest thing to do would be to shut it down before things got even worse. I helped Dennis through the process of closing the business, using my accounting knowledge to make sure everything was done properly. It was a difficult time, but I thought we were getting through it together. Dennis seemed grateful for my help, and I was just glad to see him starting to look a little more like his old self. But then, about a week after we'd finally finished all the paperwork, I got a call from our mother. "Missy," she said, her voice tight with anger, "what did you do to your brother's business?" I was stunned. "What? Mom, what are you talking about?" "Dennis told us everything," she said. "How you convinced him to let you help with the books and then messed everything up. How you gave him bad advice and led him losing customers. He says this is all your fault." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Mom, that's not true at all. I was trying to help him." But she wouldn't listen. Apparently, Dennis had spun a whole story about how I'd sabotaged his business out of jealousy, how I'd always resented his entrepreneurial spirit and wanted to see him fail. He'd even told them that the money he'd borrowed from me was just a small amount to tide him over after I'd ruined everything. I was in shock. How could Dennis do this? How could he lie so blatantly, not just to our parents, but to everyone we knew? Because as the days went by, I realized he told this story to everyone, our extended family, our mutual friends, even some of my professional contacts in the local business community. Suddenly, I was getting cold shoulders and suspicious looks everywhere I went. People I'd known for years were treating me like I was some kind of monster who'd deliberately destroyed her own brother's dreams. It was surreal. I tried to defend myself to tell people the truth, but it was hard. Dennis had gotten to them first, and his story was more exciting, more dramatic than the simple truth. Plus, he'd always been the more outgoing, charismatic one. People wanted to believe him. The situation came to a head at a family dinner about a month after the business closed. I hadn't wanted to go, but my parents had insisted, saying we needed to work things out as a family. I should have known better. From the moment I walked in, the tension was palpable. My aunts and uncles were there, along with a few cousins. They all gave me these looks of disappointment and disgust. Dennis, on the other hand, was being treated like a wounded hero, everyone cooing over him and offering words of support. I tried to keep my cool to get through the dinner without causing a scene. But then my Uncle Dave started in on me. "I just don't understand, Missy," he said, shaking his head. "How could you do that to your own brother after all he's done for you?" I couldn't take it anymore. "What are you talking about?" I exploded. "What has Dennis ever done for me? I'm the one who lent him money. I'm the one who tried to help him when everything was falling apart." The room went silent. Dennis's face turned red, but he quickly composed himself. "Oh, Missy," he said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "I know you're upset about things turned out, but you don't have to lie. We all know what really happened." That's when I lost it. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "No, Dennis," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "You're the one who's lying, and I can prove it." You could have heard a pin drop in that room. Everyone was staring at me, some with disbelief, others with curiosity. Dennis's face had gone pale. "What do you mean you can prove it?" my mom asked hesitantly. I took a deep breath. "I have everything documented," I said. "The original loan agreement, all the financial records from when I was helping with the books, even text messages and emails from Dennis asking for advice or thanking me for my help. I kept it all just in case there were ever any questions about the loan repayment." Dennis jumped to his feet. "She's bluffing," he shouted. "She doesn't have anything." But I could see the panic in his eyes. He knew I was telling the truth. "I'm not bluffing," I said calmly. "In fact, I brought copies of everything with me tonight. I had a feeling something like this might happen." I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick folder. It's all here, I said, placing it on the table. Every transaction, every conversation, the real story of what happened with Dennis's business. The room erupted into chaos. Some family members rushed to look at the documents while others started arguing loudly. Dennis was yelling that the documents were fake, that I had somehow fabricated everything. In the midst of the uproar, my dad stood up and bellowed for everyone to be quiet. Once the room had settled down, he turned to me. "Missy," he said, his voice stern but not unkind, "I think you better explain everything from the beginning." So I did. I told him about Dennis coming to me for the loan, about how excited he'd been about the business. I explained how things had seemed to be going well at first, but then started to decline. I detailed my attempts to help, the advice I'd given, the hours I'd spent going over the books with Dennis. As I talked, I pointed out specific documents on the folder to back up what I was saying. There was the initial loan agreement showing the full amount I'd lent Dennis. There were emails from Dennis thanking me for my help and asking for advice. There were financial statements showing the true state of the business, far worse than what Dennis had been telling everyone. Throughout my explanation, Dennis kept trying to interrupt, to discredit what I was saying. But every time he did, I had a document to prove him wrong. Eventually, he felt silent, slumping in his chair with a defeated look on his face. When I finished, the room was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. I could see the shock and disbelief on people's faces as they realized the extent of Dennis's lies. My mom was the first to speak. "Dennis," she said, her voice quivering, "is this true? Did you really lie about all of this?" Dennis looked around the room, seeming to realize he was cornered. For a moment, I thought he might try to lie his way out again, but then his shoulders sagged and he nodded. "Yes," he said quietly, "it's true." The admission seemed to break a dam. Suddenly, everyone was talking at once. Some were yelling at Dennis, demanding to know how he could have done this. Others were apologizing to me, saying they should have known better than to believe such horrible things about me. As for me, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. I was glad the truth was finally out, but seeing my brother brought so low didn't give me any satisfaction. Despite everything he'd done, he was still my brother. In the days that followed, the full repercussions of Dennis's lies began to unfold. Word spread quickly through our social circle and the local business community. People who had shunned me based on Dennis's stories now came forward to apologize. Some even offered to write letters or make statements to help clear my professional reputation. Dennis, on the other hand, found himself facing the consequences of his actions. Many of our family members were furious with him, not just for lying, but for trying to blame his failures on me. Some of his friends, realizing the extent of his deception, distanced themselves from him. And when the truth about the business's failure came out, several of his former clients threatened legal action for his misrepresentation of the company's practices. As for me, I struggled with how to move forward. Part of me was still angry with Dennis for what he'd done, for how easily he'd throw me under the bus to save his own reputation. But another part of me remembered the brother who had taught me to ride a bike, who had stood up for me against bullies in school, who had cheered the loudest at my college graduation. About a week after the family dinner, Dennis showed up at my apartment. He looked terrible, unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, his clothes rumpled like he's been sleeping in them. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice rough. I hesitated for a moment, then nodded and stepped aside to let him in. We sat in awkward silence for a few minutes before Dennis finally spoke. "I'm sorry," he said, staring at his hands. "I know that doesn't even begin to cover it, but I'm so sorry, Missy." I didn't say anything, waiting for him to continue. "I was scared," he went on. "Everything was falling apart, and I didn't know how to fix it. When the business failed, I couldn't face it, couldn't admit that I'd failed again, so I lied. And once I started, I couldn't stop. It was easier to blame you than to admit the truth." He looked up at me then, his eyes filled with tears. I know I've ruined everything, our relationship, my reputation, maybe even my future. I don't expect you to forgive me. I needed you to know how sorry I am for everything. I sat there for a long time, processing his words. Part of me wanted to yell at him to make him feel as hurt and betrayed as I had. But looking at him now, I realized he was already punishing himself more than I ever could. I'm not going to say it's okay, I said finally, because it's not. What you did, it hurt me, Dennis, deeply. You didn't just lie about the business. You tried to destroy my reputation, my relationships with our family and friends. That's not something I can just forgive and forget. Dennis nodded, looking miserable. But, I continued, you're still my brother, and I don't want this to be the end of our relationship. I think maybe we can work on rebuilding, but it's going to take time and a lot of effort on your part. Dennis looked up, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. Really? You'll be willing to give me another chance? I nodded slowly. Yes, but there need to be some conditions. First, you need to come clean to everyone, not just admitting that you lied, but telling the whole truth about what happened with the business. Second, you need to start making repayments on the loan. I know you can't pay it all back right away, but we need to set up a payment plan. And third, I think you should consider talking to someone, a therapist or counselor. This pattern of getting in over your head and then trying to blame others, it needs to stop, Dennis. Dennis agreed to everything immediately. Over the next few months, he worked hard to make things right. He made public apologies, both on social media and in person, to those he'd lied to. He got a job, a regular 9 to 5 position, and started making small but consistent repayments on the loan. And he started seeing a therapist, working through his issues with failure and responsibility. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks and arguments, times when I wondered if we'd ever truly be able to move past what had happened. But slowly, gradually, things began to improve. Our family, seeing Dennis's genuine efforts to change, started to come around. Some of his old friends, maybe impressed by his honesty in admitting his mistakes, reconnected with him. As for me, I threw myself into my work, determined to rebuild my professional reputation. I took on some challenging projects, working long hours to prove myself. It paid off. About 6 months after everything had happened, I was offered a promotion at my firm. The day I got the news, the first person I wanted to tell was Dennis. It was a small thing, but it made me realize how far we'd come. When I called him, his genuine excitement and pride in my achievement meant to me more than I could express. Today, about a year after the whole ordeal, things are, well, they're okay. Dennis and I aren't as close as we once were, and I'm not sure we ever will be again. But we're talking regularly, having family dinners without drama, even occasionally grabbing a coffee together to catch up. Dennis is doing better too. He's still at his job, and while I know part of him misses the excitement of running his own business, he seems to be finding satisfaction in the stability of his new life. He's paid back about a quarter of the loan so far, and he's never missed a payment. As for me, I'm doing well in my new position at work. I've made some new friends, ones who know the whole story and support me. And I've learned some valuable lessons about trust, family, and the importance of standing up for the truth. Looking back, I can't help but shake my head of how quickly everything spiraled out of control. One failed business, one desperate lie, and suddenly my whole life was turned upside down. But I also can't help but feel proud of how I handled it. I stood my ground. I fought for the truth. And in the end, I didn't let bitterness or anger consume me. I don't know what the future holds for Dennis and me. I hope he continues on this better path, that he's really learned from his mistakes. As for me, I'm focusing on my own life and success. And if there's one thing I've learned from this whole experience, it's that the truth always comes out in the end. It might take time, it might be painful, but honesty and integrity will always win out over lies and blame. So, to anyone out there facing a similar situation, whether you're the one being blamed or the one tempted to shift blame, Remember this: the truth is always the best policy. It might not be easy, but in the long run, it's the only way to truly move forward and build a life you can be proud of. Here are my thoughts about this story. This is Exhibit A of why trust issues exist. Full offense on Dennis here. This entire scenario was so incredibly unwelcome and unhappy. But can we just take a moment to appreciate Missy's patience? Like, seriously, if my brother pulled that kind of stunt on me, I'd be ready to throw hands faster than you can say failed business venture. But our girl Missy kept it cool, and that's way better than what I can say would have happened if this entire scenario happened to me, or almost everyone else I know, for that matter. Missy is just Missy. I can see why she's the successful one. Now let's talk about Dennis for a sec. This dude is like the one friend we all have who's always got $1 million idea. You know the type. They're gonna be the next Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk, but they can't even keep their houseplants alive. I swear I was getting secondhand embarrassment just reading about his meal prep service falling apart. Like, don't get me wrong, a business is hard to run. There's a reason why everyone and their grandma isn't rushing to own their own Amazon or Google. Failing at a business venture isn't ideal, but isn't something that I'd consider the end of the rope. But the part where he actually really messed up, Dennis decides to pull the ultimate dick move and blame Missy for everything. Come on, dude. Your sister bailed you out, tried to help you, and this is how you repay her? By dragging her name through the mud? That's low. I don't think it's physically possible to go lower without committing some felony offenses. The family dinner scene, she had the receipts. She was ready, and boy, did she deliver. That folder of evidence? Beautiful. Catch and expose him. It's probably felt super humiliating on his end, but guess what he literally just done to Missy? I really can't bring myself to feel bad for him when he's the one that started it. The fact that everyone was so quick to believe Dennis's BS rubbed me the wrong way, though. Like, they've known Missy her whole life, right? And they just automatically assume she's some kind of business sabotaging supervillain. That's messed up. It just goes to show people will believe what they want to believe, especially if it's juicy gossip. I'd be seriously reconsidering some friendships and even some family bonds after that. Like, Mom, hello? You can't even properly hear me out until the evidence is dangling right in front of your face. But let's give credit where credit's due. Missy handled this situation like a boss. She didn't stoop to Dennis's level, didn't start slinging mud back. Sort of, anyway. Nah, she just laid out the facts and let the truth speak for itself. Sure, she did expose him in a family gathering with a rather large group, but that's nothing on what Dennis had just done to her. Restraint, guys. Restraint. And can we talk about the twist at the end where Missy actually gives Dennis a chance to redeem himself? I gotta admit, I didn't see that coming. Part of me was hoping for some epic revenge scene. Maybe Missy hiring a skywriter to spell out, "My brother is a lying liar who lies," over the city or something. But nope, she took the high road. I can respect that. She's honestly got the patience of a saint. I suspected it after she helped him close his business. But her emotional maturity just held all that script in big bold letters. I gotta say though, I'm a little conflicted about the ending. On one hand, it's great that Missy and Dennis are working on rebuilding their relationship. Family is important and all that jazz. But on the other hand, I don't know, man. If my brother threw me under the bus like that, it'd take a lot more than a year and some therapy sessions for me to trust him again. But hey, maybe that's just me. Maybe Missy's got the emotional maturity of a Buddhist monk or something. Or maybe she's just a better person than I am. Probably both. Let's be real. Acknowledging that doesn't really change the fact that I'd still 100% kick my brother to the curb after a stunt like this, though. And hey, if any of you out there are thinking about starting a business with your sibling, maybe don't, or at least get everything in writing, and maybe invest in a good security camera system. Just saying. And now, guys, we will move on to the second story of the video. Please like the video if you have enjoyed it so far. The story starts like this. Parents tried to guilt me into supporting my estranged aunt. To understand this story, you need to know a bit about my family history. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the only child of loving but sometimes overbearing parents. My father is a high school teacher and my mother works as a nurse. They're good people, but they have a tendency to get caught up in family drama. My Aunt Carol is my mother's younger sister. Growing up, she was always the fun aunt, the one who'd sneak me candy when my parents weren't looking and tell me wild stories about her adventures in the big city. But as I got older, I started to see the cracks in her carefree facade. Aunt Carol had a habit of making poor life choices. She'd jump from job to job, never settling into a career. She'd date men who were clearly bad news, ignoring the red flags that were obvious to everyone else. And she had a knack for getting herself into financial trouble, always turning to my parents for help. For years, my parents bailed her out. They'd pay her rent when she was short, lend her money for car repairs, even co-sign on loans. They always said it was because family helps family, but I could see the toll it was taking on them. Things came to a head when I was 18 and about to start college. I had been saving for years to buy a car, working part-time jobs, and squirreling away every penny. I was so proud when I finally had enough for a down payment on a used Honda Civic. The day before I was supposed to go to the dealership, Aunt Carol showed up at our house in tears. She was facing eviction, she said, and needed $3,000 to cover back rent and avoid being thrown out on the street. My parents, as usual, were ready to help, but this time they didn't have the money on hand. That's when they turned to me. Cassie, honey, my mom said, her eyes pleading, I know you've been saving for your car, but your Aunt Carol really needs help. Family comes first, right? You can always save up again for the car. I was stunned. They wanted me to give up my car, something I had worked so hard for, to bail out Aunt Carol yet again. It felt so unfair, but the pressure from my parents was intense, and in the end, I caved. I handed over my savings, watching my dreams of independence drive away. Aunt Carol promised she'd pay me back, of course. She even cried and hugged me, saying how grateful she was to have such a wonderful niece. But deep down, I knew I'd never see that money again. Sure enough, months passed, then years, and there was no sign of repayment. Whenever I brought it up, Aunt Carol would have some excuse. She was between jobs. She had unexpected expenses. She'd pay me back soon. She promised, eventually. I stopped asking. That incident was the beginning of the end of my relationship with Aunt Carol. As I went through college and started my career, I began to distance myself from her. I'd make excuses to miss family gatherings if I knew she'd be there. I'd ignore her calls and text messages. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the betrayal of trust, the taking advantage of family bonds. My parents noticed, of course. They tried to guilt me into reconnecting with Aunt Carol. She's family, Cassie, my dad would say. You can't just cut her out of your life. But I stood my ground. I explained to them how hurt I was, how I felt my trust had been violated. They didn't fully understand, but they seemed to accept my decision to keep my distance. For almost a decade, that's how things stood. I'd hear about Aunt Carol through my parents, another failed relationship, another job loss, another financial crisis narrowly averted. But I stayed out of it. I focused on my career, climbing the corporate ladder in a marketing firm. I met my boyfriend, Chris, and we moved in together. Life was good. Then, about 6 months ago, everything changed. It was a Sunday evening, and Chris and I were relaxing after a busy weekend of house hunting. We finally saved up enough for a down payment on our first home, and we were excited about the future. That's when my phone rang. It was my mom, and from the moment I answered, I could tell something was wrong. Cassie, honey, she said, her voice shaky. It's your Aunt Carol. She's in the hospital. My heart skipped a beat despite everything. I didn't wish any harm on my aunt. What happened? Is she okay? Mom took a deep breath. She had a stroke, Cassie. It's pretty bad. The doctors say she'll need long-term care. We're at the hospital now. I felt a mix of emotions, concern, shock, and if I'm being honest, a hint of resentment that Aunt Carol's problems were once again disrupting our lives. I'm so sorry, Mom. Is there anything I could do? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Actually, honey, there is. Your father and we need to talk to you about something important. Can you come over tomorrow evening? I agreed, a sense of unease settling in my stomach. I had a feeling I knew where this conversation was going. I didn't like it one bit. The next evening, Chris offered to come with me for moral support, but I decided this was something I needed to handle on my own. As I drove to my parents' house, my mind raced with possibilities. How bad was Aunt Carol's condition? What exactly did my parents want from me? When I arrived, the atmosphere in the house was tense. My parents were sitting at the kitchen table looking worried and exhausted. I took a seat across from them, bracing myself for whatever was coming. My dad cleared his throat. Cassie, we know you and your Aunt Carol have had your differences over the years, but right now she really needs our help. I nodded, waiting for the other sheet to drop. Mom picked up where she left off. The thing is, Carol doesn't have health insurance. The hospital bills are already astronomical, and that's not even considering the long-term care she's going to need. I felt a knot forming in my stomach. How much are we talking about? Dad slid a piece of paper across the table. I looked down and felt my heart sink. The number was staggering, hundreds of thousands of dollars. We've already agreed to remortgage the house, Mom said quietly. But it's not enough. We were hoping you might be able to help. I stared at them in disbelief. Help? How? I don't have that kind of money lying around. Dad looked uncomfortable. We know you and Chris have been saving for a house. We thought maybe you could postpone that for a while, using the money to help Carol instead. I felt like I've been punched in the gut. They wanted me to give up my dream of home ownership to bail out Aunt Carol. Again, memories of the car incident from years ago came flooding back. I can't believe this, I said, my voice shaking with anger and disbelief. You want me to give up buying a house to pay for Aunt Carol's medical bills after everything that's happened? Mom reached out to touch my hand, but I pulled away. Honey, I know it's a lot to ask, but she's family. She has nobody else. I stood up, needing to put some physical distance between us. And whose fault is that? Aunt Carol has spent her entire life making bad decisions and expecting others to clean up her messes. Why should I have to sacrifice my future for her? Dad's voice took on a stern tone I hadn't heard since I was a teenager. Cassie, I'm disappointed in you. This isn't about the past. Your aunt is seriously ill. How can you be so cold? His words stung, but they also ignited a fire in me. Years of pent-up frustration came pouring out. Cold? You think I'm being cold? What about when Aunt Carol took my car money and never paid me back? What about all the times she's borrowed money from you and left you struggling? What about the fact that she's never taken responsibility for her own life? Mom started to cry, which only made me feel worse. Cassie, please, we're not asking you to forgive everything. We're just asking you to help in a time of need. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. I'm sorry, Aunt Carol is sick. I really am. But I can't set myself on fire to keep her warm. Not again. Dad's face hardened. So that's it? You're just going to turn your back on family when they need you most? His words hit me like a slap. That's not fair, Dad. I've worked hard for everything I have. Chris and I have been saving for years for this house. It's not just about the money. It's about our future, our dreams. Why should we have to give that up? Mom wiped her eyes, her voice pleading. We're not asking you to give up your dreams forever, honey. Just Postpone them a little. Help us get through this crisis. I shook my head, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. And then what? What happens when the next crisis comes? Because with Aunt Carol, there's always a next crisis. When does it end? The room fell silent. I could see the hurt and disappointment on my parents' faces, and it broke my heart, but I knew I had to stand my ground. I'm sorry, I said, softer this time. I know you're in a difficult position, but I can't do what you're asking me. I won't. Dad stood up, his face red with anger. I never thought I'd see the day when my own daughter would be so selfish. Your mother and I raised you better than this. His words cut deep, but I refused to back down. It's not selfish to protect myself and my future. I'm sorry you can't see that. With that, I grabbed my purse and headed for the door. As I reached for the handle, I heard my mom call out, "Cassie, please, don't leave like this." I paused, my hand on the doorknob. Part of me wanted to turn back to try and make them understand, but I knew that staying would only lead to more arguments and hurt feelings. So I took a deep breath and walked out, the sound of the closing door echoing in my ears. The drive home was a blur. My emotions were all over the place. Anger at my parents for putting me in this position, guilt for refusing to help, and deep sadness for the rift this was causing in our family. By the time I got home, I was a mess. Chris took one look at me and knew something was wrong. He listened patiently as I poured out the whole story, offering comfort and support. When I finished, he pulled me into a hug. "I'm so proud of you for standing up for yourself," he said. "I know how hard that must have been." His words were like a balm to my wounded spirit. For the first time since leaving my parents' house, I felt like maybe I hadn't made a terrible mistake. The next few weeks were tense. My parents called and texted repeatedly, alternating between guilt trips and pleas for understanding. I responded politely but firmly, reiterating my position. It was emotionally exhausting, but I knew I had to stay strong. As difficult as it was, I tried to focus on the positives in my life. Chris and I continued our house hunt, eventually finding a cozy starter home that we fell in love with. We put in an offer, and to our delight, it was accepted. As we started the process of becoming homeowners, I felt a mix of excitement and bittersweet sadness. I wish I could share this joy with my parents without the cloud of Aunt Carol hanging over us. About a month after our initial confrontation, my mom called with an update on Aunt Carol's condition. She was out of the hospital and in a rehab facility, making slow but steady progress. The financial situation, however, was still dire. "We've had to dip into our retirement savings," Mom said, her voice tired. "I don't know how we're going to manage in the long term." I felt a pang of guilt, but I pushed it aside. "I'm sorry you're in this position, Mom. Have you looked into any assistance programs or charities that might be able to help?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "No, we haven't," she admitted. "We've been so focused on helping family that we didn't really consider other options." That conversation was a turning point. Over the next few days, I did some research and compiled a list of organizations and programs that might be able to help with Aunt Carol's medical bills and ongoing care. I sent the information to my parents along with a note. "I know this isn't the kind of help you were hoping for from me, but I hope it can be useful. I care about you and want to support you in ways that don't compromise my own future. I hope you can understand and respect that." To my surprise, my dad called me the next day. His voice was gruff but not angry. "Your mother and I have been talking," he said. We may have been too harsh on you. This list you sent is very helpful. Thank you." I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. "You're welcome, Dad. I'm glad I could help in some way." There was a moment of awkward silence before he continued. "I want you to know we're proud of you, Cassie, for standing up for yourself, for building the life you want. We may not always agree with your decisions, but we respect them." Tears welled up in my eyes. "Thank you, Dad. That means a lot to me." It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start. Over the next few months, my parents and I slowly rebuilt our relationship. They kept me updated on Aunt Carol's progress and the steps they were taking to manage the financial situation. They even reached out to some of the organizations I had suggested, finding some much needed relief. As for Aunt Carol, her recovery was slow but steady. When she was well enough, I went to visit her in the rehab facility. It was awkward at first. We hadn't spoken directly in years. But as we talked, I saw a change in her. The brush with death seemed to have given her a new perspective. "I'm sorry, Cassie," she said, her voice weak but sincere, "for everything. I know I've made a mess of things, taken advantage of people who care about me. I want to do better." I nodded, not quite ready to forgive everything, but appreciating the effort. That, and there was still that tiny prick of doubt still lingering in the back of my mind. "I hope you do, Aunt Carol, for your sake and for everyone who cares about you." As the months passed, Aunt Carol did seem to be making an effort to turn her life around. She worked hard in her physical therapy, took financial management classes, and even started looking into job training programs for when she was well enough to work again, and slowly my faith in her built up along with her recovery. Meanwhile, Chris and I moved into our new home. It was a joyous occasion, made even better by the fact that my parents were there to help us move in. As we all sat around our new dining room table that first night, sharing pizza and laughter, I felt a sense of peace. My mom pulled me aside at one point, giving me a warm hug. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart," she said. "This home, the life you're building, you've worked hard for it. I'm sorry we ever made you feel like you should give it up." I hugged her back, feeling the last of the tension between us melt away. "Thanks, Mom. I'm glad you understand now." It's been almost a year since that fateful conversation in my parents' kitchen. Aunt Carol is out of rehab now, living in a small apartment and working part-time as she continues her recovery. She's not fully independent yet, but she's making progress. My parents still help her, but in a more measured way that doesn't put their own financial security at risk. As for me, I've learned some valuable lessons through this whole experience. I've learned the importance of setting boundaries, even with family. I've learned that it's okay to prioritize my own well-being and future. And I've learned that sometimes standing up for yourself can lead to positive changes for everyone involved. Chris and I are happy in our new home, building the life we've always dreamed of. My relationship with my parents is stronger than ever, built on a foundation of mutual respect and understanding. And while things with Aunt Carol are still a work in progress, there's hope for a better future. Looking back, I'm glad I stood my ground that day. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when I doubted myself, but in the end, it led to growth and positive change for our entire family. Sometimes saying no is the kindest thing you can do, not just for yourself, but for everyone involved. As I sit on the porch of our new home, watching the sunset with Chris by my side, I feel a sense of peace and accomplishment. We've built this life together through hard work and determination. And while I'll always be there for my family in ways that I can, I know now that I don't have to set myself on fire to keep others warm. That's a lesson I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. Here are my thoughts about this story. Let me tell you, I've dealt with my fair share of family drama, but this takes the cake, frosting and the whole damn bakery. The way Cassie described her Aunt Carol, I swear I could picture her perfectly. We all have that one relative who's constantly in crisis mode, right? Heck, just take a look around the stories on this channel and you're bound to find an absurd amount. But the real kicker here was how Cassie's parents kept enabling Carol's behavior. I mean, come on, taking your kids' car savings to bail out your irresponsible sister? That's a big yikes for me. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm all for helping family when they're truly in need, but there's a line between support and enabling. And Cassie's parents pole vaulted right over that line when they asked her to give up her house savings for Aunt Carol's medical bills. No, you just don't do that, okay? That's crazy talk. I mean, can you imagine working your butt off for years, finally being on the verge of achieving your dream, And then having your parents ask you to throw it all away? Talk about a punch to the gut. But here's where things get interesting, folks. Cassie stood her ground, and let me tell you, I was cheering her on like it was the Super Bowl final. It takes some serious backbone to stand up to your parents like that, especially when they're laying on the guilt trip thicker than peanut butter on a sandwich. I've been in similar situations when I had to say no to family. And let me tell you, it's never easy. You feel like the world's biggest jerk, even when you know you're doing the right thing. What really got me, though, was how Cassie handled the aftermath. She could have just washed her hands off the whole situation. But instead, she took the time to research and find alternative ways to help. That's some next level maturity right there. It's like she found a way to support her family without setting herself on fire to keep them warm. Mad respect for that move. But also, seriously, her parents didn't even think to look into other resources before jumping straight into life-changing, damaging solutions like dripping into retirement funds and remortgaging. And can we talk about the character development here? Cassie's parents going from guilt-tripping to understanding and respecting her decision, and Carol actually acknowledging her mistakes and trying to turn her life around. That's the kind of growth I live for in these stories. We don't see it too often, so it's always nice when a genuine turnaround is mentioned in these. Now, I know some people might say Cassie was being selfish, but I gotta disagree. There's a big difference between being selfish and having healthy boundaries. Cassie wasn't refusing to help outright. She was refusing to sacrifice her entire future for someone who had a history of taking advantage. And honestly, I think that's fair. More than fair, really. You can't keep screwing up and keep expecting someone else to clean up your mistakes. That's not how the real world works. It really, really isn't. Anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you again tomorrow.